Working the overnight shifts at our small-town hospital had always been an eerie experience. The hospital's deserted corridors and dimly lit hallways could easily send a chill down anyone's spine. But it wasn't the empty hallways or the solitude that haunted me during those long nights. Margaret had been a patient of ours, a sweet old lady whose battle with illness had reached its somber end. I had been there when she took her last breath, holding her frail hand and offering what comfort I could. But it seemed that Margaret hadn't left us entirely. It started one night during my break. I retreated to the break room, desperately in need of a caffeine boost. As I sipped my lukewarm coffee, an icy draft sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up, and there she was, a silhouette in the corner of the room. Margaret stood there, her presence both ethereal and unsettling. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, were empty and distant. I gasped, nearly dropping my coffee as I fumbled for words. "Margaret, is that you?" There was no response. Just a flicker of movement as Margaret slowly dissolved into thin air. I blinked, trying to convince myself that it had been a trick of the light, a product of exhaustion. One night, as I washed my hands in the dimly lit bathroom, I saw her reflection in the mirror. Margaret was there, her eyes locked onto mine, her lips moving soundlessly. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. But when I glanced back at the mirror, my own reflection was the only one staring back at me. The worst encounter occurred in the pitch-black hallway. Only a few dim bulbs illuminated the path, casting eerie, elongated shadows. I was on my rounds, checking on the patients, when I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat, and there she was, Margaret, standing at the end of the hallway, her frail form barely visible in the darkness. "Margaret," I whispered. She remained silent, her spectral figure slowly fading away, leaving me trembling in the cold, dimly lit hallway. I tried to confide in my fellow nurses, but they dismissed my stories as the result of exhaustion and stress. "You're just overworked," they'd say. "It's all in your head." One night, before my shift began, I found a note on my workstation. It was written in shaky handwriting, barely legible. "Margaret needs you," it read. Dread flooded my senses as I glanced around the room, but there was no one in sight. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash, determined to focus on my work and ignore the unsettling events that seemed to follow me. But Margaret's presence grew stronger, her apparitions more frequent. I couldn't escape her, and I couldn't explain why she had chosen me as her conduit to the living. As the nights wore on, I began to understand that Margaret needed something from me, something she couldn't find in the afterlife. I knew I had to confront whatever it was, even if it meant delving into the unknown. One night, as I walked past Margaret's old room, I felt her presence once more. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a deep sadness emanating from her. I whispered, "What do you want, Margaret?" And then, in the stillness of the night, I heard her voice, a faint, distant whisper. "Help me." I knew then that Margaret was trapped, unable to move on to the other side. I couldn't ignore her plea any longer. With determination, I began researching ways to help spirits find peace. It was a journey into the paranormal, one that would test the limits of my understanding of the afterlife. And as I delved deeper into the mysteries of the supernatural, I knew that I was the only one who could help Margaret find the closure she so desperately needed. I couldn't find anything practical on the web, nor did any of it make sense to me. One day, after my shift, I went home to sleep. Margaret came into my dream, and she said she needed some sort of money, and she was crying to me. I felt a wave of sadness watching the tears run down her face. I was even more confused now, learning that she needed money. I didn't know what to think. My next shift, I came early to look up the family members of Margaret. I called her son and told him everything in regards to his mother. He burst into tears the moment I told him about my dream. He thanked me and said he'd take care of it, and for me to not worry anymore. After chatting, I went through my shift as usual. The hospital grew darker and became quiet. I see Margaret at the end of the dark hallway where the dim lights met the dark abyss. For some reason, I felt relieved seeing her. I wasn't scared of her like before. I felt we had a connection. As we looked at each other from afar, I had a genuine smile, knowing help was on the way. It was like she could sense that as well. She smiled back and nodded her head. She proceeds to walk through the doors behind her and vanishes. In my heart, I knew this was the very last time I'd see her. Tears ran down my cheeks as I thought about how scared Margaret must have been. Nobody to help her, nobody to guide her. It was bittersweet. I had the honor to help a soul on the other side. A few days passed, and I received a call from Margaret's son at the start of my shift. He asked if I had a couple minutes to listen to what he called me about. I went into the break room, and we chatted. Her son told me that the reason I had a dream about his mother was because in their culture they must receive money from the living to help them for any expenses on their journey to the other side, which he'd already sent to her. To do that, he had to burn Joss paper or Joss money, as he refers to it. He further explains the reason she came to me was because during her stay, I was the one that treated her with the most care. She didn't mean to scare me, and she apologizes. I teared up again because I had no idea all of this was even possible. I thanked him for telling me all of this. It meant a lot to hear from him about his mother. Thank you to the Vang family. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.